Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. You are looking at MCTV, Multicultural Television, and you are listening to U97.5, Hot Like Pepper Multicultural Radio. Brighter Morning with Bhoe. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the first segment in our conversation with Professor Juras Sami Sarvan Kumar from the University of the West Indies, a plant pathologist. And we go on now to another interview, but I want to mention three quick items that came up on the news. We thank Chanel Al-Suran for the news. The first one was the position by the leader of the opposition indicating that there should be accountability by the minister and his team for the number of deaths which are now approaching 1,000 in Trinidad and Tobago. It is a legitimate call, and it is something that we could explore. And I had asked the leader of the opposition to be a guest on last week, Friday, and I'm going to try to get her on again to talk about some of these issues. And I saw the statement by the leader of the union responsible for Petrotrin, OWTU, in which he made the case for a commissioner of inquiry. Now, this is coming a bit late. All the decisions on Petrotrin have already been made, and we have a transition situation. But again, he raises an important issue, which is the pension issue, and we have a national pension problem with the NIS. And that is something I think that we need to explore, not just the Petrotrin situation, but the pension situation in the country, which requires some kind of solution and resolution for its sustainability. And I think that that is something we will continue to pursue on this program as well. And Chanel Al-Suran in the news also raised the issue of the flight later today into outer space by Jeff Bezos and his team, which is an important world issue that we want to pursue, even while we deal with our problems here on Earth, even while we deal with the problems here in the planet. Outer space remains a frontier for exploration, and that is driven by the work of scientists and technologists, and we want to be in tune with what is happening in the world. I want to welcome now Mr. Kevin Ramnarine. He's not on yet. Would we try to get Kevin, please? All right, he's on? Okay. And we'll talk to Kevin about the situation in energy. Will someone make contact with him so that we can make contact and so that we can begin the communication? Is he online? All right. Is he online now? Okay. Let's get him on video. All right. We okay, Kevin?
Yeah.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, let me call you formally Mr. Ramnarine, and then I could call you Kevin after that, and you are free to call me.
All right.
Bhoe.
Okay. No problem.
Okay?
Are we live?
Yeah, we are live now. So.
All right. Okay.
All right.
All right.
But thank you for coming on the program. We're going to have a lusty discussion this morning, and you are free to explore whatever issues that are important for you in the energy sector. And I will ask you questions, some of them straightforward and simple, some of them harder. But we will honestly address some of the issues in the energy sector. I see BP has issued a release refuting a position taken in I think it's in the Express yesterday, by Anthony Wilson about
Yes.
conflict between Shell and BP over the Atlantic LNG Train 1. So let us start with that. What did Anthony Wilson say? What is BP saying now in their release? And what is your assessment of the truth of the matter?
Well,
so we are getting into the issue of Train 1 Atlantic LNG right away.
So good morning, Dr. Tiwari, and good morning to all the listeners on this program. And welcome to the airwaves of Trinidad and Tobago. We have a very serious problem with Atlantic Train 1 that's been around for a while, and I'll just give a bit of history. Atlantic Train 1 came down in November 2020, and it's been down now for 8 going on 9 months. And the main reason the train is down is that there's no natural gas to supply that train. BP had signaled this as far back as 2019, when there was for want of a better description, what they call a failed infill drilling program on 2 of their fields, the Kashima and the Cannonball fields.
That was a dry well issue.
Those were the dry wells. And,
yes.
Interestingly, if you go back to the finance bill debate of 2019, which happened shortly after that announcement, the gravity of that news was dismissed.
I remember.
Was dismissed in the parliament.
In the parliament.
Yeah.
I spoke to the issue in the parliament, and it was roundly dismissed.
It was dismissed as not being, of such consequence and so on. And here we are, 2 years later, Train 1 is down. The BP would have responded this morning to the article in the Express of the previous day, which had cited a source that said that the reason for the Train 1 issue was a conflict or a fight between BP and Shell over the future of Train 1 and over the future of the LNG industry. And immediately I knew that was not so. Just to give some perspective, Train 1 has 4 shareholders. Shell is 46%, BP is 34%, the NGC is 10%, and the China Investment Corporation, which is the Chinese sovereign wealth fund, is 10%. So my understanding is that the 2 major shareholders are perfectly aligned on the future of Train 1. Train 1 only has 1 supplier of natural gas, which is BP. But that is for historical and physical reasons.
Okay, go ahead.
So that BP has no natural gas, and they've made this very clear in the press release in the Express this morning to supply Train 1. So that means that for the foreseeable future, if there's no natural gas, there's no Train 1 operation. The government, through the NGC, had spent some 50 million, reports are 300 million TT around there, on a turnaround for Train 1, which happened in the first quarter of this year. And of course, when the 10% shareholder had to foot the 100% bill for that turnaround, and the majority shareholders opted out, that of course should have flagged something for us. So that's the issue with Train 1. It's more than likely going to be down for a long time. Some have speculated that we cannot sustain an industry with 4 trains anymore, and that we could probably sustain 3 trains, but certainly not 4 trains. And while there is going to be more natural gas production from BP in the coming 12 months from the Cassia C project and the Matapal project, as BP has signaled, Train 1 is not their only obligation. They have obligations to Trains 2, 3, and 4, and obligations to the NGC. So that incremental production from Cassia and Matapal is probably already allocated across these other customers.
Okay, very good. So is there, I mean, we have a shortage of natural gas in the country in terms of production. And I'm going to explore with you a little bit what is the energy scenario, the improvement in this scenario, let's say at the end of 2022, early 2023. And we're going to talk about the local and global situation as well. But is there a tension now, therefore, for decision making that has to do with the potential sustainability of Train 1 of Atlantic LNG and the downstreamers in Point Lisas at the present time? Is there a continuing tension there that would have to determine who gets the gas, downstream or Atlantic LNG Train 1? Could you explore that a little bit?
Yeah. So you remember last year when the NGC announced that it was going to fund the turnaround to the tune of 100% or 50 million US dollars.
That was a controversial issue, I remember. Yeah.
You remember now I just want to make a point here. Some of the most conservative CEOs in the country are the CEOs of those plants in Point Lisas. And they hardly ever come out and say something strong. They tend to deal with things behind doors. However, that changed in December 2020. December 2020, you would recall all the CEOs in Point Lisas wrote one letter, and they signed one letter and sent it to the former minister, the late Mr. Khan, and they signaled their concern about the NGC's support for Train 1. And they queried, whether that meant that the NGC would be sending gas to Train 1 from, gas allocated to Point Lisas. So their view was that sustaining Train 1 may have required gas to be shifted from their plants to Point 14, to Atlantic. So there is that tension and that competition for gas between Point Lisas and Atlantic. And, there have been many studies that show that the impact of natural gas going to Point Lisas on the economy has the multiplier effect down there. And the multiplier effect may not be present as much in Atlantic. So there's always been that debate. However, I just wanted to point out that Point Lisas is still in a situation where several plants are shut down and a number of plants are running on short-term contracts. Some major plants are running on 2 to 3 month contracts. And, as we on this talk show here this morning, and a lot of our listeners are people who probably live in Central and South Trinidad, the Point Lisas Industrial Estate stimulates a lot of activity and work for contractors in the Couva Point Lisas area, in Claxton Bay and so on. One of the things that drives that activity is plant turnaround activity. And what the plants in the estate are telling me is that if they have to live on 3 month contracts, on short-term contracts and so on, they cannot plan to invest in turnarounds that sometimes cost 50 million to 100 million US dollars. No company is going to make a decision to make an investment like that on a short-term contract.
All right.
So the situation in Point Lisas is equally as grim as is happening in Atlantic.
So that tension is going to continue for some time, and you may say that the Point Lisas CEOs of the downstream companies were representing their own interest, but the point is that this tension, this policy tension between LNG on the one side and the downstreamers on the other will continue here for some time, requiring serious decision making. And
yes.
I want to ask you something. It's a tough question, but I think that you can handle it. The Minister of Energy now, in his other capacities before, because he was always involved in energy, and I'm going to give the Minister of Energy a fair chance to speak to some of these issues, if he would agree, would say that, okay, they are having short-term contracts in Point Lisas because you as Minister of Energy would have failed to renew contracts, etc. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so that's something that we've heard repeatedly since 2015 when we left office. And I just want to bring some clarity to that. When we left office, the NGC's contracts with the upstreamers, BP and Shell and EOG and so on, were all in place. There was no contract in September 2015 with the upstreamers which was expired. There was one contract.
But how much time
BG.
did they have?
There was one contract.
I want to get at the
BG.
truth of this. I think the citizens, of this country deserve to have the truth. Go ahead.
So there was one contract with BG and NGC, which I'm very familiar with because I was the lead economist for the BG asset, in 2010, before I went into the government. That contract with BG was expiring on the 31st of December 2015. And that contract was not renewed by BG and NGC because there was a project called the Starfish Project that BG was pursuing, and that project failed. The drilling program simply failed to deliver the natural gas. So all the upstream contracts were in place as of September 7th, 2015. When I looked at the downstream contracts between the NGC and the downstream, there were two contracts which were expired. They were the contract for what they call the M3 plant, the methanol 3 MHDL plant, and there was the Mittal contract which had expired. But all the other contracts again were in place. So at the material time, September 7th, all those contracts were in place. And if I were to come back to the upstream contracts, most of the upstream contracts with NGC and the upstream suppliers had expiration dates in 2018 or in late 2017 and so on. So it would have been a bit premature to renegotiate contracts that far in advance when you didn't have clear line of sight of what the future might look like. But talks were in train with BP, talks were in train with Shell, as I pointed out. The Shell, what they call the Shell-based gas sales contract, gas sales agreement, could not have been renewed because there was simply the failure of the Starfish project. So it was not because contracts were not being renegotiated. We had renegotiated a contract with Titan. We had renegotiated a supply contract with BHP and so on. So that's the situation with the contracts. I think it's a bit hyperbolic to say that, they came in and they found all these contracts on the floor expired. That is not so.
What was the expiration date for most of the contracts on the downstream side? How much time did they have? You had 3 years, 3 years on the upstream. How much you had on the downstream side?
Right. So it ranges. There was some contracts that were expiring in a short period of time. About 2 contracts that were expiring by the end of 2015. And I want to be perfectly factual here. Those contracts were with MHDL, and the other contracts were at various points, 2016, 17, 18, going out to 2025 in some cases.
Okay.
So we were in, and I suspect that what happened too is that some companies slowed down their dialogue with the NGC because they anticipated a change in government in 2015. And they themselves were, dragging negotiations out with the view that they would have a new group of people across the table to deal with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I thank you for addressing that. I think the population needs to know the truth about these things. And I think that I personally am fed up of the allegations among political principals. And without a factual basis and bringing different points of view to bear in conflict with each other with a different set of facts, none of which can be verified. So I wanted to address this issue because it has been a burning issue in the public sphere for some time. But let us look at the energy scenario very quickly. the minister was at Touchstone recently. We have a clip on that. I'll play it in a little bit. I want you to speak to the issue first. And we are likely to have more gas in 2022, certainly by the fourth quarter, and that will continue into 2023. Could you talk a little bit about the oil and gas scenario in Trinidad and Tobago, simply to let the population understand what is happening, and talk about that in the context of global oil and gas industry and what is happening?
Yeah, so we have, when we left office in 2015, natural gas production was 3.8 billion cubic feet of gas per day. It wasn't great, but it was enough to have everybody running. It's now about 2.8 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day, and that is what is causing a lot of this
shortage, yes,
difficulty in the sector at Point Lisas and Atlantic. We have some projects coming into production between the fourth quarter of this year and running throughout 2022 that will probably take us back to about, I would guess, about 3.3, if we're lucky, 3.4. But the question is, for how long would that 3.3 to 3.4 be sustained?
Be sustained, yes.
Because as you know, beneath that number is decline, natural decline taking place, which sometimes runs at a rate of about 15% a year. So one of the reasons why I believe BP is reluctant to commit to supply natural gas to Train 1 is that they cannot guarantee supply to Train 1 for a medium-term period, a 5-year period. They may be able to supply Train 1 for a year or two, but you can't sign a contract with an Atlantic train for a year or two. It has to be for at least 5 years. So the question that arises is, how sustainable is that bump that we're going to experience between 2022 and 2023? Touchstone is going to help, but Touchstone is, I expect Touchstone to be, they will help the situation, but we need, I don't think they're going to bring on that
it's not enough
quantity of gas that is going to, they may bring on, 100 million cubic feet of gas, if we're lucky a bit more. But that helps, but we need more than that. BP has the Matapal project, and they have the Cassia project, and Shell has the Barracuda project and the Colibri project. And, all those projects are going to take us a bit out of the hole that we've fallen in. But the question is the sustainability of that. The other issue is climate change. And when we look at how climate change, we have to, I think one of these discussions that we probably have to come back and have a deeper discussion on is how climate change policy is affecting the strategy of the BPs and Shells of the world.
Yes,
and how that then filters down to us.
Yes.
Because, BP and Shell are becoming, or are quickly becoming, different companies. And they're shifting their capital focus away from oil and natural gas towards renewables. And they're also looking very closely at their CO2 footprint all around the world. Now, 9% of this country's CO2 emissions comes from Atlantic LNG. Because Atlantic LNG, which is pretty significant for one organization, because Atlantic LNG uses natural gas to generate its own electricity. And those turbines, of course, give off CO2. So one of the things that BP and Shell would also be looking at in Atlantic is this CO2 scenario there. So we could come back to that, but coming back to the gas supply, their shift away from oil and gas towards renewables means that there is greater competition for capital, oil and gas capital, to come to Trinidad, because that pie of money is now has to be diverted. Some of it is being diverted to solar and wind, and that is going to have a major impact on this country's future. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that is being considered in the in the parliament or being considered by policymakers and so on. But these two major investors in this country are becoming different companies, and
Yes,
we have to ask, what does that mean for us?
a major oil company had this situation in which shareholders of the company, small shareholders of the company, basically organized a strategy in order to take over board positions in the company in order to change the direction of the company.
Yeah.
All right? And this is on
And
the
this is
international
Exxon.
market.
Yes.
This is in the global market. And this is
Yes.
Exxon of all people, you know?
Yes.
I mean,
So I think they have two. I think the climate change activists now have two seats on the Exxon board,
that's correct.
and and that could begin now to alter the conversations in the board,
And
which
BP
could
and
change the
Shell have
direction of
already
the company.
taken the position that they are into the sustainability agenda and the
Yes.
decarbonization agenda globally. And that is going to have implications for investment expenditure in various areas, right? In various
And
various
there's one more thing, and there's one more thing happening, Dr. Tiwari. And it's trade policy. The European Union is moving very quickly to make it more expensive to import LNG, and ammonia and methanol and so on that is produced with high CO2 emissions into the European Union.
All of which we are big exporters of.
And what has happened is, because all our plants were built in an era when climate change was not high on the agenda. Our plants, our ammonia plants, our LNG plants and so on tend to be high CO2 emitters. So I'm just putting that on the table that Trinidad and Tobago is facing these challenges, and I am not hearing those things being discussed on. Well, thanks for this talk show and this opportunity. But those things could mean great risk for our LNG business, our methanol business, our ammonia business. So that's that. And if Europe is taking the lead, it means other countries like Canada and other OECD countries will follow.
Yeah, well, we can't let the partisan political debate dumb down the nature of the conversation in the country, because there is such a thing as the citizens' right to know. And there is such a thing as, who does government and parliament make decisions for anyway? Don't they make decisions for the people who live in their country? And that is an important decision. That ultimate policy decision between LNG on the one hand, the export of LNG, and the export of downstream. We found ourselves in a hard place where we had to make a choice. Which is the better choice and why? If we had to cut off LNG export or cut off some of the exports in the downstream, methanol and some of the other products, what would we do?
Well, to give my honest assessment of that, I would say that on a national interest basis, Point Lisas generates more value for the country. And I say that in terms of employment,
services.
In terms of services, and Point Lisas also contributes a lot in terms of corporation tax and so on. However, we have this problem where the major producers of natural gas are also the owners of Atlantic LNG.
Sure.
Right? So when they look at their value chain, their value, which also is national value because they paid a lot of taxes and royalties and so on, their value is better served by sending gas to Atlantic, where they could get these cargoes of LNG, which they could market globally. So that is the dichotomy there. Different governments have.
But a policy decision has to be made. The government cannot waffle forever.
Exactly, I think so. And
I mean,
Dr. Farrell had done.
we're facing a situation here where if decisions are not made, we run the risk of slipping down the chute.
Well, interestingly, around the time I was minister, Egypt was faced with the same problem. And Egypt decided to shut down a couple LNG trains and keep the domestic market whole. Of course, Egypt is 100 million people, and they have, a lot of those people depend on electricity, and there's political instability if you don't have electricity. So they have a different political and economic situation. But it's interesting that the Egyptian government took that decision. Subsequently, what happened in Egypt is that they made the Italian company ENI, together with BP, made some huge discoveries of gas, and they were able to bring back the LNG industry pretty quickly. But the decision of the Egyptian government was to close down some trains, to keep the domestic market whole. But you asked me a direct question, and the answer is that the better value for the molecule of natural gas is in Point Lisas because of the multiplier
And
effect.
this is from a national point of view.
From a national point of view.
And
Yes.
if you make a policy decision like that, then the companies would have to make decision correspondent to your policy decisions. And of course, they would find their ways to profitability and sustainability.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
But again, the challenge, as I pointed out, is that the BP and Shell, they are the major shareholders of Atlantic.
Yes.
And their business model in Trinidad does not end at Point Fortin. It continues into the marketing of the LNG globally.
That's right.
So we have to take that into consideration too.
What about the other issue that you raised, though, with the European Union? And these things are going to become fiercer as time passes, with climate change wreaking havoc in the way that it is, and people becoming concerned about it. What about the fact of the aging or the aged Point Lisas plants and their ability to produce competitively and to compete competitively in the global market?
Well, the main reason Point Lisas has lost competitiveness I would say in the last, I want to be honest, in the last 10 years. So let's throw the whole last 10-year scenario onto the table. Is one, the supply of natural gas to Point Lisas began to decline. So instead of plants running at 100%, they were running at, let's say, 80 to 85%. And that missing 15% really means inefficient capital, idle capital. And the second reason is that the price of natural gas that those plants pay increased significantly around 2019. And that was when you had the first sign of that was the fallout between CNC Ammonia and NGC, which you would recall erupted into a public spat, which is again very, very uncharacteristic of Point Lisas, where they tend to do things, in a conservative manner.
Yeah.
So that that was the first sign that something was wrong with the pricing in Point Lisas, and it's a continuous theme from the CEOs on the estate. If you go through the media, the CEOs at the closure of the Yarra plant cited the price. In terms of the Titan plant, the Titan, which is owned by Methanex of Canada, they also cited the fact that they could not make a profit. I listened to the CEO of Methanex, who is John Florin from Vancouver, talking about the fact that if the plant cannot make profit in Trinidad, they will have to shut it down. And that's very, very reasonable. I mean, that's business, right? So the competitive environment in Point Lisas has been diminished because of the physical supply of gas, one, and two, the price of gas. At the same time, of course, as you would know, the shale revolution has not gone away. It may have been, dealt a blow by the change in the administration in the US. because the Biden worldview is much different from the Trump worldview.
Sure.
But the shale revolution continues, and natural gas is very cheap in the United States, and you've had the reopening of many closed ammonia and methanol plants and so on in the US. So that too is a threat. So there's this threat of the shale revolution. There's this threat of the CO2 policies of BP and Shell, which are being driven by European Union policy. So there are all these external threats coming now to bear on Trinidad and Tobago. There's also the fact that I want to point out that a few weeks ago I listened to the BP statistical review of world energy, and the host said that the world is going to need about 47 to 24 million barrels of oil by 2050, which is a lot less than we need today, which means that the high-cost producers of oil in the world are going to be the first ones to die. And Trinidad is among the highest cost producers of oil in the world.
You said 2015. What year did you mean?
2050, 2050, 29 years from now. So it is very possible that within the next 15 years, let's say, which takes us to 2036, oil production in Trinidad would have to come to an end. Not for the lack of oil, but for economic reasons.
Yes, competitiveness issues and market issues.
So we are facing these huge threats, and I am not seeing the debate
the
or the policy formulations to deal with these
is
things.
Wrong, isn't it? It is too
Very
political, wrong. It is not national enough, and it is not futuristic enough. And I think that there's a serious problem here in Trinidad and Tobago. You can't face the world with dumb answers to stupid questions.
Yeah, and we've always had this problem where external threats bring the wipe out industries in Trinidad. Sugar was as a result of changing policy with the WTO. Cocoa was a victim of rising production of cocoa from West Africa, and so on. So our major industries have always faced these external threats, and the question is knowing that it's coming and preparing for what to do when it begins to erode your competitiveness.
And making decisions and then making new decisions,
Yes.
Anyway, I want to play some clips for you now, and I will play them in sequence, and with you I can take the chance that you will hold all of these in your head, and then I will ask you just to comment briefly on each one, all right? Because I know you would capaciously take in what is going on here, and then we will engage it. The first one is the Cassia platform. Just show a clip of that for like 10 seconds. Okay, so I just want to speak a little bit of the story to that, and we can cut that now and then go to Minister Young. Just now, we'll get to that, Kevin, is that all right?
Sure,
I'll take Minister Young now.
Country with a truthful explanation as to why NGC, unfortunately, suffered this historical loss this year. Madam President, the population would have heard me say before that one of the first tasks that I was asked to perform in 2015 was to go and renegotiate the only energy deal the UNC government put together in 2010 to 2015. A disaster of a deal, not only for the energy sector of Trinidad and Tobago, but in fact for the NGC.
So the first one is the Cassia platform. I want you to talk about that. And the second one is really the minister talking about this disaster of a deal for NGC and for Trinidad and Tobago called, well, he didn't call the name, but it's Mitsubishi. So let us have a conversation. You can deal with the Cassia very quickly, and then we can get to the Mitsubishi.
What we saw in the video there was the Cassia C compression platform, and in the video it's on a barge, and there's a very, if you look at the video, we don't have the video again, there's a very large crane, the Hirima Tayalf. It's
Yes.
one of the largest cranes in the world, and that crane is there to lift that platform and put it onto some legs, which would be just above the surface of the water. So that's a compression platform, and simply what that is, that's a very large vacuum, all right? If I was to simply explain,
Yes.
that is going to suck out what we call stranded gas from the reservoirs. Because the gas has reached a point where it cannot naturally flow out of the reservoir because it has lost the pressure, right, in the reservoir to flow out. And this very large vacuum, the compression platform, is going to pull it out.
So for the public watching, stranded gas is the gas that remains after most of the gas from the well has been sucked out, and you now need to create a vacuum in order to pull it out because it cannot come out on its own.
Yeah. So initially when you drill a well, gas comes out naturally because it's under high pressure underground. Yes. But over time that pressure falls, and what you end up with is gas which is stranded behind. So you have to use compression to pull that out.
Where was that platform built?
That platform, that structure you see there was built in Altamira, Mexico. Okay. And this,
and
of course,
was the
is one of the
controversy we had here where Mr. Roger said, take your platform and go, and they went.
Well, the take your platform and go comment was related to the Angeline platform.
Yes.
And I think what that did was set in train some events that eventually sees BP preferring to procure to build its assets in Mexico. And of course, one of the challenges in Trinidad that we've been having with that fabrication yard is industrial relation issues.
Yes.
All right. I don't think that BP is going to have work stoppages in Mexico.
I don't want to take us off track and get too long into that. But we could do with having those platforms here and creating the jobs. And we have the capacity to do it, and it would make a lot more sense if we would get our act together, wouldn't it?
In fact, just to mention, when Tufco, which is a Trinidad-owned company, when Tufco finished the Juniper platform in 2017, Tufco explained to me, because they had captured the data, the spin-offs of that construction. They showed me the number of subcontractors, the number of suppliers, and there was this big ripple effect that benefited hundreds of companies. Yes. So when you lose a platform to Mexico,
hundreds of companies
you're
and
losing all that.
thousands of workers.
Thousands of workers, hundreds of companies, the trucks, people who supply fastening equipment, welders and so on. It's a big ripple effect.
All right. Now, let's get to this Mitsubishi matter, which the minister raised.
Right.
He said Mitsubishi was one of the worst investments in the world and so on. Explain it.
Okay, so I know we don't have much time. I think we have 5 minutes, eh?
Yeah, well, you try and do it in 3.
All right, I'll try and do it in 3.
You gotta make your points quick.
The minister, with all due respect to my successor, you cannot walk on a beach and pick up 3 stones and look at those stones and try to tell a story about the history of the beach. You have to have, Minister Young wasn't around in 2014 and 2015 when these discussions were being held. That project, and it's unfortunate that, he paused corn on the project because the project is operational. It's a success. There is a 1 million ton
could we show some of the photos of the domain while Kelvin is talking? Continue to talk and we'll show this.
The issue of what had to be renegotiated, well, he said he wanted to renegotiate. I don't know on whose behalf, but all the contracts, all the agreements that underpin this plan that you're seeing here were positively vetted by the Solicitor General as at the 26th of July 2015. I have the memo I found the memo from the Solicitor General. The only thing which was outstanding was a legal opinion, which was outstanding as of election day. And that was the basis that the incoming government used to renegotiate some of the agreements. Now, let's come very quickly to the NGC loss in 2020. The NGC loss in 2020 is mainly as a result of impairment. So that's an accounting terminology that says that, if an asset at the time the audit is being done cannot generate the value that it was intended to value, you impair the value of the asset. That is not a permanent state of events. That could change if the prices of methanol rebound, and as they have done in 2021. So I expect that the impairment of the contract with Mitsubishi, I expect that will be reversed because methanol prices are now pretty good. They're close to $400 a ton.
So the issue of loss
and NGC should be making money.
The issue of loss is related to the price of methanol and would go up and down in terms of value depending on the price of methanol.
Right. So there are two things that changed since we signed that agreement in 2015. One is that the NGC is paying a lot more for gas. And two, at the point in time when the NGC started to sell that gas that they're paying a lot for to Mitsubishi, you had the aberration of COVID. And the methanol prices that Mitsubishi was realizing was very low.
Yes.
And the price that the NGC realizes for selling to Mitsubishi is indexed to methanol. So the two things that change is one, NGC is paying more for gas, and two, they are realizing a lot less for that gas because methanol prices are low. I'm saying that situation would have been reversed in 2021 because methanol prices almost doubled in the last 6 or 7 months.
All right, very quickly now, we have 1 minute, Kevin. You have to deal with this. What is the value of the Mitsubishi plant, which the minister says is useless to Trinidad and Tobago? Very quickly, tell me what that is.
The investment, and you saw the pictures, the investment is $967 million US, but more so, it is the first petrochemical plant in this country outside of Point Lisas. The decision was made to put that plant there when we consider the socio-economic issues in La Brea. Interestingly, is a PNM constituency. And it was part of, as you know, it was part of the wider strategy to develop the Southwestern Peninsula, which included things like the highway and the Mitsubishi plant, and there are plans for further port developments in southwestern Trinidad. And, of course, the hospital in Point Fortin and all that.
What economically will it bring to Trinidad and Tobago of value that we didn't have before?
It brings, one of the major things it brings is the corporate culture of Japan, which previously we've had experience with Germans, Americans, Canadians, and the English. This is a different corporate culture, and Mitsubishi is not only into methanol, whereas let's say Proman is only into methanol. Mitsubishi is into a whole spectrum of products. So it also brings that skill set that could take us deeper into the methanol value chain.
And part of the arrangement was for deeper movement into methanol manufacturing, DME, and other manufactured goods.
Other manufactured
And that is
chemicals.
why Massey became part of the investment. Is that correct? Because they were prepared to go downstream into manufacturing.
That is correct, and Massey is 10% of that plant that we just saw.
Okay, we are going to have to close there, Kevin. I'll have to bring you on again and we'll talk. Maybe we can have a whole program on that. Thank you very much. We pass on now to Chanel and the news. Brighter Morning with Bhoe.